Everything has a purpose. Even machines. Clocks tell the time and trains take you places. They do what they're meant to do. Like Monsieur Le Beast. Maybe that's why broken machines make me so sad. They can't do what they're meant to do. Maybe it's the same with people. If you lose your purpose, it's like you're broken.
Hello and welcome to episode 38 of We'll Review It Ourselves, the podcast where we review the movies on our shelves. Every 2 weeks we'll take a randomly selected movie from our collection and we'll review it ourselves. I'm Brian Morgan, and as always, from Los Angeles, the city... Oh wait, no, that's a different city. Anyway, from Los Angeles.
What were you going to call it?
I was going to say the city that never sleeps.
No, yeah, we sleep sometimes.
But that's New York.
Yeah, let's say we sleep sometimes. But yeah, this is Dan Bergman, coming in from the City of Angels.
Which is a decent movie, and that is on the list, so we may review that at some point.
Okay, actually it's the City of the Angels. But...
Los Angeles, I believe. Yes. But we are not reviewing City of Angels or any other Los Angeles-based movie this episode. This episode we are reviewing Hugo, 2011 Martin Scorsese film. But before we get to that, let's get to our listener feedback, and we have some from listener BTAR on our Ghostbusters episode. He posted on our Podbean page, and he said, "Nice episode. You guys really nailed it about how New York is a character in the movie." He added a bit of trivia that we did request in the podcast, so I do like that our listeners are actively seeking out answers to our questions. He said, "By the way, the lions are not anatomically correct."
All right. Well, thank you for that. Good to know. Life can now continue, now that we know that the lions do not have genitals.
Important point of note. He also made a request for our random listener request selections. I wanted to add Spider-Man 2.
Good to go.
So Spider-Man 2 is on the list. So there you go. And thanked him for the feedback on the Podbean page, and we are thanking him for his feedback here.
Yes, we are. We appreciate the participation.
Yes. I had hoped at some point we would get more listener feedback, and it seems to be coming to fruition. We're growing as a podcast. It's very exciting. Sorry. It's a little self-serving. Mm-hmm. I was reading something on Twitter about marketing your podcast and trying to be genuine. And that's one of the things that I've struggled with in our Facebook posts and Twitter posts, is making sure that, we're genuine, because we really just want listeners to join in our conversation is really what it boils down to. So, that being said, that is all we have for our listener feedback right now. And again, at the end of the episode, we'll provide you with ways to contact us. So let's move on to the second most important part of the podcast. Dan, how did this movie get on your shelf?
Oh, boy, where to start with this one, man? This is, I could go with the obvious that this is a great movie. Very well made. I one of the things in watching this movie and taking notes, I just noticed that this was a very beautifully made film. I mean, I don't want to say that Martin Scorsese makes ugly films, but this film's kind of it's a departure of what I've come to know Scorsese for. He's known for the gritty, in-your-face, no-holds-barred mobster movies. And this is anything but. The only way I can describe it is just a very beautifully made and beautifully presented film. And when I first saw it, it was right about the time I was taking a history of cinema class. So that just kind of...
No, ironic.
Yeah, well, not ironic, but very, very uncanny. The happenstance and coincidental, I guess, is the words I would use for it. But it melded nicely into my study, what I actually enjoy. It just seemed like a logical film to add to the collection.
Fair enough. I sadly do not own this movie. When this popped up on the list, I thought, oh, cool, that's an H. I'll just run right down and grab that and set it off to the side so I can watch it later. I got down to my movie shelf and said, hey, do we not own Hugo? And Christy looked at me and said, I don't think so. Which movie is that again? It's like young kid at the train station, sort of the history of film kind of thing. She's like, no, I don't think we own that one. Really? I thought we did. So I ended up watching it on Amazon Prime, and I enjoyed it. I will probably be adding it to my collection in a location which I will reveal at the end of the episode. So, yeah, it was very strange. Like I said, I was shocked that I didn't own this because I had heard so much about this movie from film critics. It's not a movie that I think most of the people that just watch movies to watch things blow up and to go escape something, if you will, are on the lookout for. It's not a movie that people will go, oh, that movie was just, it had everything, in the sense that it sneaks up on you and says, hey, I've got really good stuff in here. And until you actually give it a chance, you might not know that. That's kind of the way I meant that. Not in the, this is a horrible movie, just in the, most moviegoers would tend to go see something with explosions or something big bill, and this was not quite it.
Yeah, I would dare say that this is probably a movie intellects kind of movie. Somebody who has a deep appreciation for film, I think is the target audience here, because like you said, the general population, they want to see things blow up, and I get it. That's a healthy part of my collection as well. It's entertainment, and sometimes the explosions are just right to where you're like, oh, I gotta own that. But yeah, this is one of those things where you have really, and I say really deep ties with film and film history. And what I mean by that is like I said, a deep appreciation for the history of cinema and its origins and how far it's come since those days. If you don't have that kind, at least a measure of that appreciation, I don't think you're gonna enjoy this movie too much.
I do think it's a compelling story. It's definitely something that is good for the whole family. And this is going to be a little bit of a rabbit hole, but my grandmother was not a really big fan of movies. When I was younger and I lived with my grandparents, I think we had a movie channel for a little while when it was free or they had a discounted price or something. But she was never really a big fan of movies because, there's too much cursing in that, or it doesn't mean anything in the sense that it doesn't really convey any sense of emotion. It's just, there's just things blowing up. And I love my grandmother to death, but it was kind of one of those, old woman yells at cloud kind of moments where it's like, these newfangled movies, they'll never catch on. But one of the movies that I watched and then suggested to her as a movie that she might enjoy was a little movie called Batteries Not Included, if you're familiar with that.
Oh, yeah.
And she was in the hospital and having some surgery done, and she had some time to do, nothing. So we rented it for her and brought it up to the hospital when she, was there for a day or two. And she watched it and she really enjoyed it. And this movie, Hugo, has that same feel to me in the sense that it feels like something you could just sit down and have a wholesome family moment with, as opposed to, do I have to worry about there being boobs in this? Do I have to worry about some sexual innuendo or, some wanton violence? It's a good, wholesome movie. There's a little bit of violence, and when I say that, I mean in the quasi-comedic sense of Sacha Baron Cohen's character chasing after Asa Butterfield's character Hugo, and being stuck to the train by his leg brace and the train wreck. But there's nothing in this movie that says you cannot take your kids to see this.
In a technical sense, yeah, very true. You know, it's just I don't know if I would choose the word wholesome, but yeah, it is a very family friendly movie.
Why would you not use the word wholesome?
I don't like that word.
Oh, nothing more than that? I mean, you don't think this movie fits that quality?
I will not say so because I don't use that word too much in my vocabulary because I don't like using it. There's better terms that I feel, in my personal repertoire of vocabulary, there are better words to describe this movie.
And those would be?
Like I said, family friendly.
Wholesome.
It's a rather...
I'm sorry, I'm poking the bear just a little bit. Family friendly is an apt description.
Mm-hmm. Some people might say boring. And that's why we're saying that most intellectuals are the ones who would really enjoy this.
I'm going to disagree, and not because I don't think that intellectuals wouldn't enjoy this movie, but I wouldn't
say they wouldn't. I said the general population would not enjoy it because you yourself said that most people go to movies to watch explosions. So if you want to throw in words that I don't mean, then,
well, that wasn't my intent.
No, but you did it.
Well, but that wasn't my intent. So hold on just a second, Dan. I know you're laughing, but I was not trying to throw in words you didn't mean. What I was trying to say was, if you're saying that this is a movie that only intellectuals will enjoy, then I'm going to disagree with you.
No, I didn't say that only intellectuals.
I think that intellectuals will enjoy it, but I do believe that others will enjoy it as well if they give it half a chance.
And again, like, I don't disagree that, yeah, if it's somebody who has no knowledge of film history and who Georges Méliès was, and just thought, okay, this is a movie I found in the store or in the rental or on Netflix, and just watched it and said, wow, okay, yeah, this was a nice movie. It was very calm and relatively family friendly, and I didn't have to worry about this. But the thing is, too, it's like, I don't personally know why somebody would show this to their child because, again, if they don't have any appreciation for film history, what reason is there for them to watch it? You know, and it's the thing, you have to have some level, I'm thinking of appreciation to get the full enjoyment. And again, people who would think that this is a nice little story, they think, well, you can get that anywhere else. And it may not be high on their list.
And I will agree with you there. I think that knowing the history of film gives you a much better appreciation for what has been, or for the love letter that this has been described as to film. However, I will say that I'm gonna disagree with you about the overall nature of this movie. Even if you don't know the history of film, this movie tells you, it shows you why Papa Georges is important, why this is such a moving tribute to film in its own way. It tells you this is the guy that used to make these movies. You don't have to know specifically who he is beforehand going into the movie. I don't think that takes away from the enjoyment of the movie as a story. I do think that knowing that beforehand gives it a bit more emotionality, if you will, to appreciate what they're doing with the film as a concept. But it is, after all, a story that is made up. None of these things happened except for Papa Georges made these movies. And there was a point where his films were destroyed, and then there was a ceremony to honor him, and he was restored to the greatness that he so rightfully deserved for the groundbreaking film techniques that he pioneered and the movies that he created. So this movie gives you that. It shows you that, but there was no Hugo.
No.
You know, this Hugo, the boy, is just a vehicle to get you to the tribute to one of the fathers of modern cinema.
Okay. So that being said, then when we watch this film, and I can't speak for anyone else other than myself, so I'm just going to speak for myself, okay? And it's under the assumption that like-minded people may or may not, most likely I say they may, feel similar if not the same. It's that when you watch this movie, when you have the deep appreciation for cinema history and the legacy of Georges Méliès, that you get the full appreciation, and that is the character that you most remember, that you most adhere to and feel an emotional connection with in this film, because we know he is real. As opposed to Hugo, which we know is the fictional character, and it's like, okay, yeah, he's the vehicle that gets us to that. They show us the cinema history, they show us why he's important and everything, but if you don't know about that, and you, for all intents and purposes, think that he is just as fictional as Hugo is, then you're gonna, oh, that was such a moving story, and that poor old man, but he wasn't real, so you move on. Whereas someone like me, who has a deep appreciation, knowing that, yeah, he had greatness, he fell into obscurity, almost forgotten, and then rose back to prominence and now has his rightful place in history. To me, that is incredibly moving. And I love stories like that. To me, it's like the story of Jack Northrop, who developed Northrop Corporation, which, made airplanes ever since the war. World War II, I should say. I would say not the war, but, World War II. And, I mean, he had a great, incredible story where, he was, like I said, he was a big man in his industry. One of his last projects before falling into obscurity, he was trying to develop the Flying Wing, which is an airplane that's just basically a wing and no body.
I'm familiar.
Yeah, back in the 40s, he could never really get it to work because he didn't have the technology to really make this thing achieve its full potential. And again, this broken man fell into obscurity, and it wasn't until close to just before he died, government agents came to his house and said, "Mr. Northrop, we'd like you to come with us." Okay, so he went with them and brought him to a special facility and said, "Yeah, we have this project we're working on, and we're about to unveil it, but we'd like to show you first. It's been classified, we've given you a special clearance, and we'd appreciate you don't talk about this until we unveil it." And he's like, "All right, what do you got?" And they gave him a model of the B-2 stealth bomber.
Mm-hmm.
And hearing that story about how he held that model in his hand, in his frail, hands, just like, wow, my idea. They did this, even though he was only holding the model, he knew they did this, and that coming out of obscurity and realizing that your work was not forgotten. That is a beautiful thing. And I'm getting choked up just telling the story right now. So forgive me if I falter a little bit, but, and that's exactly how I felt with this movie. It moves you so much because it's true. And this person, went through this, and you have such an emotional connection because you have such an appreciation. And that's what I mean. It's like, when you're someone who appreciates that, you feel it to its fullest potential, as opposed to somebody who thinks it's just part of the fiction. And that's what I really mean.
Okay, and I appreciate that, but I think this movie stands alone as a story, whether you know about the history of film or not, because I think that there is enough exposure in common culture to understand what the imagery of the bullet hitting the moon in the eye, from the Earth to the moon, and some of the old films that he created, they've had exposure in the last 20 to 25 years as things that exist. They have been put into the public consciousness, perhaps not dominantly. It's, it is by no stretch something that they immediately go to as an idea like, oh, yes, I know exactly all about that movie. If you say Georges Méliès, they're like, French guy? Made some bread? I don't know. But if you say Martin Scorcese or, Robert Downey Jr., or Steven Spielberg, and I use Downey Jr. as an actor. Just, if you say something like that, they're like, oh, yeah. His name is not on the tip of people's tongues, but they know of his work. So when they see that in the movie, they go, oh, wait a minute, I've seen that before. What is this? And it may make them want to seek out more information. So in the sense that, yes, this movie is better, I think, and I agree with you, appreciated if you know the full history of the man. The fact that it introduces you to the man gives it more of a primer, if you will, on film, and perhaps some will want to go look him up. So, for me, I could not remember the gentleman's name. I have seen documentaries about the history of film. I've seen the footage that they showed in this movie. There were some things that they said in the movie towards the end when they're actually getting ready to do the Film Academy ceremony, when they talk about hand painting each of the cells, each of the frames. This is color film. This is groundbreaking, and I was not aware of that because many of these things had been lost for a time. When they spoke about, or when they showed rather, some of the movie magic that he did when he was creating his initial films, the double exposures. I did some research after I watched the movie to find out what techniques he sort of helped pioneer, and a lot of the special effects techniques that are in use today owe their origins to him and to what he did. And one of the things, I looked on Wikipedia, and I know college professors will say, you cannot use Wikipedia as your source. There's no way to compile it in your bibliography. There is no way to include it in a footnote, and we shall not accept it as an input. But for the purposes of the podcast, yes, use the Wikipedia. I'm fine with that. But the things that he did were, just, phenomenal. And they go through his entire life. They talk about the illusion that he crafted, and many of the movies were just about that illusion. They weren't plot driven. It was just, hey, look, I can do this thing, and that's kind of cool and fun and neat. And he was just not afraid to take a chance.
No, and that's the thing, though. I think one, like you say, he had his origins. He was a stage performer, magician, illusionist, and I think that too. But I think as far as movie making was concerned, just the very act of making a movie was taking a risk. Because I don't think that there was the studio structure then that, it's like taking a risk is like, no, make the safe movie that we know is going to sell. It was always selling because it was such a novelty, and it was just barely learning that you can use the medium to tell a story, or at least a short story or whatnot, so... Yeah, everything that they did was taking a risk, if you in a barest sense. But at the same time, I don't think he felt it was taking too much of a risk. Like I said, this man spent his entire fortune to do this, something that he felt very passionate about. And if it wasn't for the war, who knows what he could have done more.
Yeah, I think though, and again, this goes to the limited amount of research I did on the Wikipedia page and sort of what I gathered from the movie combined. It seemed as though the war changed people's tastes, and they say something to that degree in the movie, and I agreed with it, because when they came back, it was like, I don't need to see that reality. I need to see something else, and he never really changed with the times to capture the taste of what people were looking for.
I think history says the same thing, that the war changed taste. I think what we really fail to say here is that the war changed tastes quicker than if it naturally evolved, because suddenly we were thrust into this conflict, and like he said, people had seen the worst, and taste changed really quicker than if, again, like I said, if you just had this natural progression of changing fashions and ideas. And who knows, he may have changed with it, but that just, like I said, it wasn't to be. It's the way history played out.
But happily, and this makes for the Hollywood ending, and I hate to say that in the cliche sense, but his life had a Hollywood ending when someone rediscovered him, if you will, and said, "Whoa, hey, come with me. You have done things that are worth honoring, and we would like to honor you." And for that to happen is one of those rare events where someone is appreciated in their own time for their art.
It is rare and very treasured, because it just doesn't happen very often. A lot of times when they think that the person is dead, 9 times out of 10, they're right.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that, again, going back to what we sort of started this conversation with, that's one of the things that gives this movie its non-film historian viewer an emotional lift at the end. You don't have to know if this guy is real or not. It doesn't matter, because at the end of the story, they've discovered that, fictitious or not, this man had done things, and now he was being honored. So, again, it's a standalone story by itself that can be appreciated.
Yeah, and again, I don't disagree with you on that. And I think my statement though is just that you really feel its fullest potential, knowing that this is a true story. And so that's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that this, and I know somebody's probably just going to hear, I don't consider this movie boring. Like I said, I was just throwing words out there. This movie was fantastic. So just for the record, fantastic movie. And I don't not agree with you. It can stand alone or anything, but like I said, for me, it hit me really hard, to the appreciation and the emotional response of seeing this movie and knowing that this is what the guy went through and to see it brought to life in this film.
I agree with you, and I would like to speak for one moment on the emotional response, because while I was reasonably emotionally invested in the younger characters, when they got to the part where Papa Georges had his flashback, or rather, was it Mama Jean? When they were discussing the films that they had made back in the day, and then ultimately leading to the viewing of the film in their house, I was a little emotional. I was a little choked up. Again, I did know that historical piece that this was a real man, and that sort of played out that he was destitute and that sort of thing. But from a presentation standpoint, going to the movie, there's no evidence that any of the things that happened in the movie happened in real life to that point. So it was an emotional, touchstone, if you will, to see that wistfulness in the actress's eyes, to look back at that time and remember all of the creative and interesting things that they did and the life that they had and how they were living a dream and they were entertaining people. It's everything that an entertainer in whatever category wants to do. And I thought that from the acting standpoint and from the presentation standpoint, this movie did a fantastic job of showing that. Again, when Papa Georges walks into the room and says, "I could never forget the sound of a movie projector." That's touching stuff. Again, didn't have to have happened in real life. And one of the things that I kind of wanted to point out, or one of the notes that I'd taken, was, is this real? Because I wasn't familiar with the story of Hugo and whether or not any of these things actually happened in his life. They didn't. I mean, again, as we'd mentioned earlier, the two younger characters are merely vehicles to introduce us to the movie's main character, perhaps not the protagonist, but the main character. And none of that happened. It's just it's a movie, or based on a book. And there were some changes, and we'll get to that. But this movie uses the children as innocents to go back to the movies of the innocent. While there were some satirical religious movies made, and there was some topics that perhaps caused an uproar in the day, most of the movies were designed to capture the imagination and to bring dreams to the screen.
Yeah, I was about to say, it was featured in this film was the short subject, which was basically titled "The Kiss," where you just show the gentleman with the large mustache kissing his wife, sort of on the cheek, a little bit at the corner of her mouth. But man, back in that day when that came out, man, that was scandalous. I mean, oh yeah, that was the touch off, the spark that created porn. And if we're talking about movie history, porn did not take long to begin once film came into its own and somebody saw it as a medium to tell stories.
Well, I think that was one of the things that was in the old Nickelodeons, if I recall correctly. Mm-hmm. That was the, "Come this way, gentlemen, come this way." And it was always geared towards gentlemen with no interest in whether or not the ladies appreciated it, because it was a man's world.
Yeah.
But going back to the presentation that this movie makes, again, it uses these two children to view these movies wide-eyed and wonderful in the way that we all want to return to when we go see a movie. I think anyway. I mean, I know there are some movies that I go to and go, okay, yeah, this is going to be something, cerebral, and I'm going to have to, think about things. But there are some movies that I just want to sit there and enjoy the wonderment that is the movie on the screen. Like Avatar, I think a lot of the enjoyment from that movie is just that it was so new and brought us to an environment we'd never seen in a way that we had not seen it done specific, or done before that. We'd had some things that were pretty close, but again, we want to go sit in wide-eyed wonder and enjoy those thrilling days of yesteryear. Back when, and I'm sorry, well, you know what I'm going to say it anyway. Back when America was great. And I say that in that return to the 50s when, you could scrape together a dime and go catch a matinee, with your big brother or your big sister or your little sister or whatever. And it was, Roy Rogers and his cowboys out on the trail. You watch these movies with abandon. It was, you got to go into their world. And I think that's something that we miss sometimes when we watch movies nowadays, because we have become incredibly cynical and incredibly jaded.
Yeah, I got nothing to say to that. It's very true.
Yeah. Which goes, and I was going to add that this movie has a huge amount of innocence in it. The Sacha Baron Cohen love story is just a simple story about a man who wants to meet a woman, and he's scared. It's comedic, it's amusing, and he's not necessarily the person that you would root for in most movies. Like, oh, it's the Inspector evil guy chasing the kid. Nah, I mean, he is, but he isn't. He wants love too. What is it? The milkman and the baker, the croissant lady. I forget the characters' names. When he goes out and buys the dog so that they have something in common, their two puppies can mingle, and he can kind of get past that initial yippy dog thing. There are some extra flourishes in this movie that give it some depth as to the characters, because I don't know that this movie would, or that a story couldn't be made, rather, with none of that in it. Just a boy being chased by the station inspector who lives in the walls and winds the clock because his uncle is a drunk and then eventually ends up dying, and he just wants to remember his father. I think that movie could stand on its own, but I like the fact that those other characters are in there because it does give it that secondary purity, that struggle that we all understand of just trying to find someone in the world.
Well, okay. Because you really went on with that, and there was something I was going to say when you brought up Sacha Baron Cohen, but I let you go on, and I don't know how to segue into from your statement. I like your statement. Great. I don't disagree with it. Well stated. I was going to say that, seeing Sacha Baron Cohen in such a different role than what we've come to know him in, if you're used to seeing him in movies like Borat and Bruno, this is quite a departure from what he usually does. And the beautiful thing about his character is a lot of it is developed without words. And the scene that I love so much because of the technique and what the message states, and shows you everything. Remember the show instead of tell thing that we always talk about in this? Early in the movie when he first starts to approach the flower girl and his leg brace pops. And it's just like the whole station is silent. Like everybody just heard it and everybody stopped moving. And he popped it back in and walked away. And to me, that was just like, it said everything. And it just was so powerful. And I'm like, oh, you poor guy. It's like, oh, I needed everything I needed to know was in that little sound. And I love that. I love that way that film tells that story like that shows us everything we need to know in such simple, sublime little actions. To me, that's beautiful.
Yeah, it's my turn to say I have nothing to say because I completely agree. Yeah, that was actually a moment that was in my notes that I did want to talk about, so I'm glad you brought it up because I think you said it very well. It's a powerful moment in the movie because... Well, let me ask you this, because I was going to say something and I want to ask you. Aside from the impressive power of the moment, what did it say to you? What did it make you feel in relation to how you might feel?
I'm not sure what you're asking me. Are you saying like did I relate to him in that moment? Yeah, absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely. Because I know it's like I still have very vivid memories of my youth and trying to find love and having an object of your affections feel so far away and so unobtainable that you can't even go up to that person and say hello. And it's something so insignificant that anybody else would be like, no big deal, but to you, it's devastating. And if I had, if I had that leg brace and it popped and everything, and to me it was like a source of shame or whatever. Yeah, that I totally felt that, because I was that person. And when the first time I saw this movie too, and like I said, having learned everything I need to know about this character and realizing that, okay, this is a pitiable man. He's human. He has redeeming qualities. So, you kind of wonder, it's like, why is he acting like this? Why is he throwing orphans in the orphanage and acting like this? In other words, it makes you care about this character that you want to find out why he's acting the way he is. He's not just another throwaway bully. You're compelled to stick with him and say, okay, look, I want to find out what this guy's all about, man, because this guy has some redeeming qualities.
I think that when he captures the first orphan, which in fact is really the only child that he catches that's not Hugo, his statement to him is telling of who he is and what his character's motivations are. He looks at the little boy and says, "Where are your parents?" Which, okay, that's a reasonable question. But one of the most impactful statements that he made was, "Everyone needs someone. Where are your parents?" And it's not about them being orphans, it's about him recognizing that everyone needs someone. And his idea is that the orphanage, for better or worse, will give them someone to take care of them at the very least, so they have someone to need.
Yeah, well, two things on that. One, even though you only see him capture two orphans, one of which he actually sends away to the orphanage. This goes back to, again, our talk on filmmaking techniques and about how sometimes just a little picture will tell you everything you need to know. And I cite The Incredibles, the picture of the pilot when she asked for a plane. Well, in that scene when he captures the first orphan, you look on his wall, the camera pans, and you see a bunch of children with the red cross or red line through them. Like, that's his trophy wall. And again, just a quick pan of the camera over that told you everything you need to know. this guy does it a lot. Those are his trophies. He's caught them probably the same exact way you just saw and done the same exact thing you're about to see. So there's that. So you know his history. You don't exactly have to see it all the time.
But yes, I agree with you. That is a fantastic way of showing that he's been doing this for a long time and that he obviously has some skill at it, and that lends credence to, or rather lends the gift of escapism to Hugo because he has evaded him for so long. But when you say these are his trophies, is that in a good way, or is that a source of pride for him?
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, I don't think this movie really ever said one way or the other, because you never really saw him celebrate his captures. He just sort of did it, and which brings me to the other point of when he captured Hugo. Now, he said, you said the first one, he said everybody needs somebody, but when he captured Hugo, he says the orphanage will be good for you because it'll teach you self-reliance, because you don't need family. You need to, be strong. You don't, and he repeated it several times, which, again, it's another one of those things that shows you it's like, okay, this guy's had a hard life because he's probably come from an orphanage as well. So again, if you want to consider it as a source of pride, maybe so, because he feels that he's doing right by these children, because maybe that's where he possibly came from.
I think that I remember that scene just a bit differently, because if I recall, he actually said something similar about you need a place to belong, and that's why the orphanage. I think he had made the association that this was the nephew, because I think he even said your uncle is dead after he had found out about it. So again, okay. I think my filling in the blanks, I attribute perhaps some of what you said where he grew up in an orphanage and learned self-reliance, but I also think that gave him the rationale that the orphanage will give you a place to belong and that, they will take care of you and you need someone to take care of you. We all need someone to take care of us.
Here's the line as quoted from IMDb movie quotes. This is Hugo, I've got to go. Inspector, you go nowhere until your parents are found. Hugo, I don't have any. Inspector, then it's straight to the orphanage with you. You'll learn a thing or two there. I certainly did. How to follow orders, how to keep to yourself, how to survive without a family, because you don't need one. You don't need family.
Okay. Well, then I obviously have remembered the scene wrong, but I do recall when he captured the first child that he specifically said, everyone needs someone, where are your parents? I didn't get the feeling that it was about, I have to capture you and put you in the orphanage, but I have to give you a place to belong so that someone will take care of you.
And again, I'm not disputing that. I'm just thinking that you asked if that wall could possibly be a source of pride, and I say possibly so, because, again, if he feels that, that the orphanage is indeed that place he feels that kids can find someone or something to belong to, it's there. So he feels that by doing what he does, he's doing the right thing. He's making the world a better place by doing that. And seeing those faces on the wall might hint that he feels that way. I kind of doubt it myself, because the expression of the red line through them, I kind of took it as he's eliminating the train station of riffraff. But again, open to interpretation.
But it could be that too. It doesn't have to be any one single motivation.
No, and again, that's what I like so much about this character. He's not a throwaway bully. He's not a throwaway villain, and like we've discussed in other movies. He actually is a character that you kind of want to find out what he's all about, because you find out enough about just to care about him.
Yeah, I agree. And that's one of the things that, like I said earlier, I really appreciated about this movie is it filled out its extra characters to give the world a feel that would be completely different if they didn't have that. It would just be, yep, cops chasing the kid's got to find out a thing, and something good is going to happen at the end. And this going all the way back to the beginning of what we were talking about. This is a movie that is not dynamic. Yes, some things happen, and there's a train wreck in the middle of it, but it's I don't want to say slow, but it's definitely something that you have to invest the time in to sort of get into it, to get it going, to find out where it's going. And it does take you on an adventure, which is, again, kind of the point.
I'm so glad you mentioned the train wreck, too, because that's one of the things I was kind of wondering how I was going to segue into it. But the train wreck scene, again, to say that this movie wasn't just something for everyone to see explosions or anything, the train wreck scene was actually a nod to Méliès. And I don't know if you saw the little quick clip when they were showing his films at the end that he portrayed a train wreck or a train going off the cliff. And I don't know if you noticed that the train wreck in Hugo's Dream was almost an exact recreation of that special effect that Méliès did in one of his films. And
yes.
Yeah, so saying that, it's like, yeah, okay, so it wasn't there just for the sake of having a train wreck to make people go, ooh, ah, explosion. It was a nod to an aspect of film history. And that's the thing I loved about this movie as well, is that there were so many. And even right from the beginning, when he took Hugo's notebook and he was looking through the pages and he got to the point where he's doing the flip book thing and he said, yeah, the face of the automaton turning. That was like the beginnings of film. That was the inspiration when people would make flip books and everything, and realizing that, yeah, a series of pictures with slightly varying features will make the illusion of motion. And that was the beginnings of film right there. That was the genesis. That was the primordial ooze, so to say. And I love that they showed that. I don't know if showing more features of historical points in film history would be necessary in this movie. Probably not. The movie was great.
I would have enjoyed it, though.
I would have enjoyed it too if I saw a zoetrope or any one of the other many stepping stones that led to actual film cinema. But again, the film was good as it was, and they did show a number of silent movies that are relatively famous. Safety Last, which was the scene where Harold Lloyd is hanging from the clock. And I know it's one of those things that people say, it's like, oh yeah, I know that image, but they don't know what it's from. They don't know who the actor is hanging from the clock and everything. But I love they paid homage to that, and they saw Buster Keaton in there. It was just nice that Scorsese threw those in, and he did it appropriately.
And it wasn't overly... Oh, God, I can't think of the word. It wasn't overexposed. It was just enough without being too much of an homage to the early days of film. He could have just injected things in there, at every opportunity, and he didn't. I mean, it actually took some time to get to an actual cinema house to see the film that you're referring to, and then it's not for a good long time afterwards that we see another film in the movie that, again, is a love letter to film.
Yeah, and again, Scorsese, again, just didn't inject it any old place. Again, it was part of the history of film montage that kind of gave you an idea of the progress. And again, like I said, you saw Buster Keaton, you saw Charlie Chaplin, and it's just like, wow, okay, that's cool, because I know those things, it's just like that again, for me being a film buff and really appreciative of the history, I was just like, yeah, that's so great, it's like the star cameo,
And I agree, and this goes to, again, my support for these images being injected into our current culture. I think a lot of people have seen the bullet in the eye of the moon, and that's one of the iconic images in history and also obviously in this movie. So to see that, again, gives it that air of authenticity to the era that it refers to, and lets you know that, whoa, hey, again, this could be a true thing, or at least have some relationship with the truth.
Yeah.
I know I keep going back to that, but it's kind of a counter to me, again, because I don't think that I'm as much of a movie history buff as you are. I like the history of movies. I like seeing older movies like that, older films, but I don't necessarily know all of the names. So again, I had to Google the Georges Méliès name because I couldn't remember it. Mm-hmm. Whereas it's something that you just know.
And you mentioning that too, my appreciation for film history. The thing that I also felt very heartwarming in this movie is that they mentioned the Lumiere brothers as being the pioneers of cinema. Cinema was one of those things that developed in parallel. There really isn't a very first person that created cinema. I mean, I'm sure history books, depending, whether the timeline or somebody that you say, oh, he was the true pioneer. I think whoever did it first is irrelevant in this case because it was being developed in parallel. It was like, the evolution on two separate branches of the evolutionary tree as far as technology is concerned and coming up with the same results. Like I said, it's just the French aspect of film pioneering, of the creation of film. The French tend to get a little ignored because, again, in America, we're quite Americentric, if that's a word.
I think our listeners will understand what you mean by that.
Yeah. But yeah, we tend to forget that there are other countries in the world that made contributions, and there was, like I said, the film was developed in parallel, and the Lumiere brothers definitely had their spot in history, and I'm so glad that Scorsese chose to mention them. They certainly were the inspiration for Méliès to do what he did. So, I mean, I think if they were left out, that would have been an atrocity.
Yeah, and again, going on the Google box and finding out that Georges Méliès saw a film camera and then went and made his own. He's like, yeah, I can't afford this. No one wants to sell it. I forget the actual details. I apologize. But he's like, well, I can figure this out. And he went and basically made his own movie camera. There are not many people that could do that and figure that out, but there are enough to where if you think about the concepts, you're like, well, I saw somebody take a picture of a picture of a picture, another picture, and another picture. I could do this. I could figure this out. Yeah, it's definitely rational that it would develop in parallel, that two independent thinkers could come up with the same concept.
Absolutely. So that said, I mean, again, on that aspect, I don't know how much more I can praise this film. Like I said, I mean, if you're a lover of film, this is definitely the movie for you.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the things that I kind of wanted to talk about was some of the imagery and how this movie starts with the most current technology in film, and that is CGI, and it lays out in front of you an entire CGI creation, restoration of Paris in the 1915 or in the 1910s, I believe it was. I don't recall the specific date, but in the early 20th century, and it's all CGI. And then at the end of the movie, you're going back to the very beginnings of special effects, and it's stop shooting. All right, you guys, everybody stand still. Mm-hmm. All right, you guys run out there, get me the pyrotechnics. Okay, and start shooting. Poof, and they're gone. Hey, all right. I mean, that's that's amazing from a filmmaking standpoint, because it actually goes technologically from newest to oldest as opposed to oldest to newest. Yeah. It doesn't tell the story in that particular order. And then the imagery of all of the machinery and Hugo working in the watch repair shop with his father and all of the other geared mechanisms, wind-up toys, the clocks. It definitely evokes an era, but it also goes to movie projectors and the gears that they use and the sprockets and the way things interact in life. Like teeth meshing in a gear. We all do a thing, and as Hugo says, we all serve a purpose.
Yeah, this the word that came to mind when I was watching this was steampunk. I mean, to me, this was like late French steampunk. I don't even know if that's a thing, but I mean, usually when you talk about the steampunk culture, it's the late 1800s, 1880, 1890s, you know, and you're talking about the works of Jules Verne, and
yeah, it's usually Victorian England, you know, that sort of thing.
You know, and that's the other thing, very English portrayals, and to see it in a French setting, that was kind of neat. I don't think I ever really thought about that. I don't think I thought about it the first time I saw this movie, but I was really thinking that because a lot of the gears, the machinery, the clockwork, the steam engines, you know, steam pretty much everywhere that Hugo, when he was in his lair, that's all you saw was a lot of steam.
Yeah, and that from the trains, from just the environment. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think that's a fair assessment.
But, you know, the thing I was going to ask, too, you know, when you talking about how this film went from showing us the film in CGI and then later showing us film done in the pioneer techniques, what do you think Méliès might say about films today? And I don't mean like the subject matter. I mean, I'm sure he might have his cultural criticisms, but about, you know, what his techniques inspired, you know, the technical aspects. Do you think it would just blow his mind, or do you think, you know, he might just go, it's like, wow, really, you did that for my ideas? Or
I think a little bit of both. Again, I think that the artist in him would go, oh, the things I could do with this, the dreams that I could make.
Mm-hmm.
Just the imagery that I could capture. And the other part of me wants to say that there would be a certain amount of sadness to see how much it affects our lives in, I don't want to say a negative way, but I guess that's as good a description as any, how people have poorly reacted to someone else's art. Or in the case of, I'll use The Last Jedi, how some people have taken some things entirely too far and harangued and criticized and harassed, you know, actors in a movie over something that they didn't like. And that, I don't think that quite answers your question.
No, I think it does. It answers my question. Like I said, it's like, you know, I think the answer I do like though is that as the artist in him would definitely take over and say, oh, what I could do with this, you know, it's like, oh, the imagery, you know, because that's what he was all about. He wanted to make magic. So I love the line when he's at the Academy giving his speech and he says, my friends, I address you all tonight as you truly are, wizards, mermaids, travelers, adventurers, magicians. Come dream with me, you know. And my first reaction to that is like, oh man, I wish he could see Harry Potter, you know. And maybe even Doctor Strange, but you know, maybe more Harry Potter than Doctor Strange.
I would say more Harry Potter than Doctor Strange, and that gives me an interesting opportunity to segue because this movie came out in 2011. Harry Potter had been around for a minute. I think that Chloe Grace Moretz, if I'm pronouncing that properly, her character Isabella was modeled after Hermione to a degree.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, again, that goes to movies paying homage to other movies. But when you said Harry Potter, that just made me think of Hermione and what the young lady in this movie was trying to do. I think she was inspired by that. So,
yeah, don't have a very good segue from that, but you know, I'd like to just kind of bring up a couple of lines that I liked and what it reminds me in contemporary movies. And there was one line when the scholar who meets the kids and tells that, you know, he's kind of the local expert on Méliès, and he reminisces about when his brother took him to the studio and he said he actually met Méliès, and Méliès told him, if you've ever wondered where your dreams come from, look around. This is where they're made. And right then and there, I was taken to the movie Inside Out, the Pixar film. Have you familiar?
Yeah, I know of it. Yes, I have not seen it.
Oh, you haven't seen it?
I have not.
Well, you know, it supposedly takes place in a child's mind. And there's a scene where they go to some place that is a movie studio, and it's their dream studios. And that's kind of just made me reminded, it's like, oh yeah, a movie studio, and that's where their dreams are made.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, so it made me chuckle. Not a profound moment, but it made me chuckle. And then, of course, the other line was a much more sad line, but it says, life taught me one lesson, again, spoken by Méliès, my life has taught me one lesson, Hugo, and not the one I thought it would. Happy endings only happen in the movies. So that line took me directly to a movie that you showed me not too long, well, actually it was a while ago, but we're old, for a movie called Swimming with Sharks, spoken by Kevin Spacey. His character is Buddy, and it said, life is not a movie, good guys lose, everybody lies, and love does not conquer all. Which is kind of a more spread out way of saying that, life doesn't always have a happy ending.
True, but again, in this movie, he does get his happy ending.
He does. But like I'm just pointing out that these lines made me think of other movies. So, like I said, I did the description you used, which I like. Like I said, this was a love letter to movies, and it did that so well.
I completely agree. Speaking of quotes, one of the things that I latched onto as a quote that actually meant something to me, it is spoken by Hugo, and it's a bit long, so bear with me. He says, I'd imagine the whole world was one big machine. Machines never come with any extra parts, They always come with the exact amount they need. So I figured if the entire world was one big machine, I couldn't be an extra part. I had to be here for some reason. And that means you have to be here for some reason, too. Maybe that's why a broken machine always makes me a little sad. Because it isn't able to do what it was meant to do. Maybe it's the same with people. If you lose your purpose, it's like you're broken. That it was like he took a little arrow, drew back the string, and launched that sucker, and it hit me right in my heart because you see so many people who are just existing, who are just moving through their day-to-day lives, and they don't know why they're there. They're just doing a thing. They go to work. They go home. They mow the lawn because that's what they have to do. They dress a certain way because that's what they're told to do. They don't have a mission. They don't have a reason. And yeah, there are a lot of people who say, no, I have a purpose. I have to do this. But it's not until you actually find your special purpose in life that you truly feel whole. And I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, but it's such a compelling line in the movie for an 11-year-old or 12-year-old or however old he is to utter, to show his wisdom. He may not be book smart like Isabella, but he understands people. He has observed enough to know that people need something. They need some reason to go on. And that's why in the movie, when they finally get the automaton repaired and it draws the image, it's not the end. It's just the next beginning. And it had to be that way, because had it just did a thing, that would have been the end of the movie. You don't need anything else because his purpose is done. His purpose was to get this message, or was to get this thing working and to get the message. And it just led to another thing. Just like the teeth of two gears meshing, he just transferred from one gear to another and moved on. That was a powerful moment for me, and I think it gets me a little bit because, again, we all struggle with that what's my special purpose idea in life.
Yeah, I don't know how to follow that, because that one was like way up there, man. You set the bar really high there, but I'm just going to sail down here a little bit and kind of go back to what you were saying too. It's like, when the automaton drew the picture, it actually was when they found the key and made it work and it was drawing the picture. It like you said, in most cases, that would be the end. And in fact, Nina, who watched it with me for the first time for her, she kind of thought it was the end. She's like, "How is the movie over already?" Type of question. I forget exactly what she asked. But yeah,
I didn't know we were watching a short.
But then realizing there's much more to the story. And it's like and even though you think that it's serving its purpose now, the purpose still had yet to be revealed. Okay, so it drew the picture. That's not the extent of its purpose.
Yeah, it was just another piece in the machine.
Yeah, but to really segue far off, but not quite, still has maybe a thread or two connected to what we're talking about. Again, this whole thing of purpose inspires me to think of another film. Again, really unrelated, but Matrix Reloaded. And it just reminds me of the line, and this one's sort of long, but it was Agent Smith. It says, "But as you all know, appearances can be deceiving, which brings me back to the reason why we're here. We're not here because we're free. We're here because we're not free. There is no escaping reason, no denying purpose. Because we both know without purpose, we would not exist. It is purpose that creates us, purpose that connects us, purpose that pulls us, that guides us, that drives us. It is purpose that defines us, purpose that binds us. We are here because of you, Mr. Anderson. We are here to take from you what you tried to take from us. Purpose."
And same message, different delivery, a little darker.
A little darker. But, and the funny thing is, again, just kind of showing that, this whole thing of cinema, everything's connected. Storytelling, it's all connected in some way. Because, they talk about purpose and all these different movies that hardly have anything to, in relation other than the theme that they're talking about. And I think we've talked about the other thing in other movies about maintaining control. That's another thread that connects all these movies, is because everybody wants to maintain the level of control.
Yeah, no one wants to feel like they're out of control. And going to your point about the common themes throughout movies, we've addressed that before. There are only so many different ways you can, or so many different themes, rather, that you can present in a story. What matters is the manner in which you do it, the dream that you create along the way, to, sort of use the previous words.
How many different ways can you express the human experience? Apparently we're not done yet. I don't even think we're halfway through.
I would say that we're far, far less than halfway through. As long as there are humans, there will be dreams, and there will be someone there to create new dreams with some sort of new medium.
Mm-hmm. But, talking about sameness and a finite number of themes or anything, I will say one thing. There's only two aspects of this movie that were less than perfect. I don't want to say they were bad, but less than perfect. And the first one, again, does with the opening image of the movie, which starts with the Eiffel Tower. Does every single movie that takes place in modern France have to open or show the Eiffel Tower at least once?
Yes.
Okay, I guess so. I mean, it's like, because I'm thinking, it's like, no, I know the French are a much more nuanced and deeper culture than just the Eiffel Tower, or just Americans that limited in scope.
I don't think it's limited in scope. It's an establishing shot to show you location. You're in France. You could show any turn-of-the-century buildings in any city in the world, and they could be almost interchangeable. Yes, there are specific architectural styles and a certain feel for the street, and obviously the writing will be in French and that sort of thing, but it establishes the city that you're in. It establishes to a reasonable degree the time frame that you're in. You're obviously, after the Eiffel Tower was built.
Yeah.
But based on, the structures, it's not long after. I mean, it's again, it sets the scene in a nanosecond, Vice giving you 5 minutes to figure out, where the hell are we? What part of the world are we in? Because they're speaking English, but I guess they're in France. I'm not sure how this works.
Yeah, But that's the thing, though, too. Like you said, it's like you realize where you are in a nanosecond. To me, that just seems like the easy way out. And, like I said, we've been praising this movie, and it's like this movie didn't exactly do things the easy way out. It did things very well. It did things very well nuanced and appropriate and everything. I just thought that maybe they could have done a little better with just showing us the Eiffel Tower to let us know that we're in France. That's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, and I'll acknowledge that as a valid criticism, but one of the other things that it did in the opening scene was also play music that is generally associated with France in that era. If you listen to French music now, it sounds different than French music in the early 20th century.
Again,
so,
that might have been enough. I mean, showing the cafe and just the culture and everything. Now, that would have been enough, at least for most, I think, to realize it.
But I think you also have to establish kind of the time period to let you know, this is after the Franco-Prussian War. The trains and their design should sort of give you that piece. But again, it's filmmaking shorthand, and I don't particularly hold it against them.
Yeah, I will say too, there is a challenge because, this is an English language film, so having people speak French wasn't a possibility, especially since a majority of these actors were English, which
there was that,
which really brings me to like a pet peeve I have, and I see it in a number of films, not every film, a number of films, and even a video game, where French people are speaking with English accents. And that annoys the crap out of me.
Especially in media set in that time frame.
Mm-hmm.
There's a dominant influence of, as you said, English accents in France. Well, they have the French accent. Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
Yeah. So yeah, that is just a pet peeve of mine, and that's why it's like so refreshing when I see actors like, and forgive me if I'm butchering his name, Checky Cario. It's a Tcheky, second name Karyo. He's been in movies like Kiss the Dragon, La Femme Nikita. Forgive me for mentioning this film because I think it's an abomination, both cinematically and historically. But the Mel Gibson movie, The Patriot, he was the French officer.
Okay.
Anyways, yeah, he's Turkish, but he grew up in Paris, so he has a really nice French accent. I like his accent. I believe he was also, what was that Matthew Broderick movie with Meg Ryan where he's trying to win back his girlfriend? It was called Addicted to Love. And he says, that's me, I'm Superman, and France was like Krypton. On Krypton, everybody was Superman. You make nice sauce, everyone makes a nice sauce. You say hello to a woman with your French accent, everyone says hello. But here on Earth, this is the place where I knew I had special powers. I tell bankers about my little village in France, and they all say how brave and amazing you are, Anton. I could read a phone book to a woman, and they become hypnotized.
It's true. I think America has a love affair with accents. It's not particularly one or the other, although some people will say, oh, I love a good British accent, or, I love a French accent. And some people will just say, I love an accent. It's just out of the norm. And even once you get past our own regional accents, like Boston and all the other things, like the upper Midwest has its own spin on things. Southern has its own take on the language. And that's even depending on what you consider Southern. If you go to Texas or Georgia, they're still considered Southern, but they have a different take on the accent. So I think outside influences are so exotic because, as we have mentioned before, a lot of Americans don't travel outside of the country, and a lot of Americans, a significant percentage of Americans do not even remotely speak a second language, whereas most other countries, English is taught as a method of dealing with the rest of the world. We're just like, well, we know English. Why do we need to learn it or learn anything else?
Mm-hmm.
They've learned what we do. So
yeah, that reminds me of that joke. It's like, what do you call somebody who speaks 2 languages? Call them bilingual. Somebody who speaks 3 languages, you call them trilingual. But what do you call somebody who only speaks 1 language? American.
Nah. Yeah. Real quick, I just wanted to do one sort of back segue. You had mentioned the actor that was in The Patriot and that he was Turkish. And ironically, when I was in the Navy, I was on deployment. We were in the Med. We were doing some work with NATO, and we were doing personnel transfers. And everyone wanted to go over to the German ship or the French ship or the English ships because they could have a beer while they were over there. The Turks had one of our old Knox-class frigates that looked just like my first ship. And no one was volunteering to go over there. Well, I didn't have any interest in drinking on another country's ship, so I volunteered to go over to the Turkish ship, and they treated me like a king. It was fantastic. And interesting point of note on that trip, the rack that they put me in was in the exact same berthing in the exact same location as the rack I slept on my first ship.
Oh, very nice.
So when they said, hey, can you find your way back to your berthing? I said, oh, yeah, I'm good. Yeah. This is like old home week.
Mm-hmm. Not a problem.
But we were sitting in their mess area watching a movie, and the movie that they were playing was The Patriot. So I've always associated that movie with the Turkish, and to find out that there was a Turkish actor in there playing a Frenchman who was French, I guess, but Turkish by heritage, is kind of amusing, and I might have to go watch that abomination of a movie, as you put it, again, just to see that guy and go, oh, hey, cool, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, that's where I learned to play pişte, and I learned how to say thank you and a few other things in Turkish.
Nice.
Teşekkür ederim is thank you in Turkish. Listeners, I know how to say thank you in Turkish. I just gave you a language lesson.
Very good. But unfortunately, like I said, this movie just couldn't get people with French accents, at least. If they're going to speak English, French accent. It'd have been nicer if they spoke French. I don't mind a subtitled movie.
Neither do I. I enjoy it sometimes.
Yeah, it's my own personal criticism. I mean, it's not diminishing the greatness of this movie. I'm just saying that's my armchair quarterbacking, as I like to say.
Yeah. Didn't Sacha Baron Cohen do a faux French, Maurice Chevalier type of accent kind of thing?
I don't know what accent he was doing. I did not immediately recognize that accent as French, so I'm not sure what he was going with it. It was different. I did enjoy it. I could not identify it if you asked me.
Yeah, I gotta say, I think that they could have put someone else in that role and still had the same emotional beats and the same delivery. Maybe better, maybe not, I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of Sacha Baron Cohen. I've liked him in maybe 2 movies, and this being one of them. I saw Borat. I didn't care for it. It's a little too over the top for my taste. Because of that, I didn't see Bruno and some of the other movies that he's made. I liked him in Talladega Nights. Yes, it was over the top, and yes, it was a stupid, stupid movie, but I knew what I was getting into going into it. It was kind of a click, and my mind's off, and I'm watching the cars go round and round, and that there's Will Ferrell up there being Ricky Bobby just trying to race. So, it was fun. It was a mind killer to a degree, but it was mildly amusing. Mm-hmm. But, yeah, I'm just not a fan of the work that he's done. Again, he's entertaining a lot of people, so more power to him. I just don't find him entertaining.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I find him entertaining. I don't not like him. I'm not, pining over him, but he makes me laugh every once in a while. So that's. I haven't seen him in Alice Through the Looking Glass yet. That's one of those movies I have on the list that I need to see.
Okay.
So I'll say maybe sometime I'll say, oh, I liked it, and we'll put it on the list and we'll review it someday. But we'll see.
Yeah, this was one of those movies where you see, particularly the two younger actors, because obviously younger actors don't generally have a filmography where you're like, oh, they were in this, 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 and because they grow up and start to look differently as adults than they do then. I mean, this movie is 7 years old. Chloe Grace Moretz was in Kick-Ass and Kick-Ass 2, which I'm gonna say I'm kind of on the fence about both of those movies. I think the first time I saw it, I didn't really know how to take it, and I watched it again, and I don't know. If it's on your shelf and you think that maybe someday we should talk about it, I will happily watch it again to give it that opportunity. But anyway, she's in that, and she's a totally different character. I think that this movie gives her quite a different acting turn from what she'd done previously, and seeing her in movies now, I think they, and when I say they, I mean Hollywood executives, kind of expected her to be a lot more popular than she was, because she was in a couple of movies that it was, she was the lead, and you could kind of tell based on the marketing that they were like, yeah, it's, remember that girl that was in those movies that you liked? This is her again. And, they never really took off. I like her as an actress. I think she's got a lot of talent. I think Asa Butterfield, this and Ender's Game are the two things that I recognize him from. I don't know, again, if these are two child stars that are going to show up 20 years from now and go, remember that movie they made? Yeah, they back. But Ben Kingsley, I mean, what is there to say about him that hasn't already been said? So I'm just going to say I absolutely loved him in this movie. Mm-hmm. He looked the part. If you look on Wikipedia, and look at the image, it was like, oh my god,
yeah,
good job Ben Kingsley for having the facial structure to pull that off.
Yeah, thank your mommy and daddy for giving you those genes, because you nailed it. And who would have thought somebody who could look like Gandhi could also look like Georges Méliès? Go figure.
Yeah, no, I agree wholeheartedly. And then I think I shall leave this one to you, but there was a tall gentleman, sort of a beard and a voice, and a bit of a
I was waiting for an opening. For that.
I'm giving you that opening.
Yes,
the door's open. Wander through.
Mr. Christopher Lee as the bookstore owner. I mean, what better role could he have had in this movie? I absolutely love that he's in it. Because this is the guy. I don't know if he still holds the record. But, IMDb, 280 credits in film. I mean, last I looked, he said he had the record for most film credits to his name. And, I don't know, he died back in 2015, so I guess other people might be catching up to him. But, I mean,
I'm sorry,
his voice is magic to me.
It is distinct, and it aged very well. It's a voice you can pick out in a crowd and go, oh, that's Christopher Lee. I mean,
that's the thing. It doesn't matter if he's playing an evil character or a relatively benevolent one, like this one. It's just a voice that you just kind of like take notice, and you're like, okay, I'm listening. I'm not gonna. I'll let you speak.
I will say, and this is one of the things that I like about film, and I don't like about film, is there are a metric butt ton of people today that would see him in a movie and go, oh, it's Darth Tyrannus, or it's Count Dooku. And not that there's anything wrong with him playing Count Dooku, but it's sort of like, Sir Alec Guinness, like, oh, it's Obi-Wan Kenobi. Like, you know, he was in a whole bunch of other crap before this, right? You know, it's kind of sad sometimes when they're so closely identified with, for all intents and purposes, one of the least substantial roles in their entire career. You know, I mean, Count Dooku existed in, you know, what, a movie and a half-ish? Barely? If that?
Yeah, I would say not even that.
And, yeah, and granted, it was a Star Wars movie and it got a lot of exposure, but you can go to IMDb, like you just said, and look at Christopher Lee's filmography and go, oh, he was in that? He was in that? Oh, he was in that? Because he's such a chameleon.
Mm-hmm.
Again, while the voice is distinct, it's distinct in a way that doesn't give it away all the time. And he uses that rich timbre to convey the thing as opposed to just being the thing. If that, I mean, does that, I know that's kind of vague-ish.
No, I think it,
but
it says it.
But yeah, so I kind of feel bad for him because, again, you know, he's identified with the most recent stuff and not the rich body of work that he'd previously done.
Yeah, but, you know, it's the thing, though. It's just one of those things where it's like, you know what? I can't control that. I can help it along. I can tell people he was in so many others, but there's only so much you can do. And I just revel in that. I know that he was in so much, and that there's so many movies that I can quote him with. You know, it's like, oddly enough, my favorite movie that I love quoting him from is The Corpse Bride, and it's the scene where because he was the priest, the church, the pastor. I'm sorry, that's the word I'm looking for. He was the pastor, and you know when Johnny Depp's character is screwing up the lines and everything. Oh, this boy doesn't want to be married, you know. That's, of course, I can't do his voice, but I just love that whole delivery. You know, again, his voice, but you know, it just brings us something. Again, it's going off down another rabbit hole and everything. But I just wanted this. I think it's because we're talking about Christopher Lee, and I think it's appropriate. He is well known as a longtime actor, obviously. There's a meme that goes around Facebook that shows him, Peter Cushing, and Vincent Price in the same picture. And talking about, you know, these are where nightmares come from, something to that effect. They have a long history of doing dark and scary movies. Peter Cushing obviously was in Star Wars. He was Grand Moff Tarkin. And Christopher Lee was Count Dooku, Sith Lord. If Vincent Price had lived long enough, do you think he would have been part of the Star Wars lexicon? And if so, what kind of character do you think he would have played?
That's an interesting question. I don't know. I think that Vincent Price, for the most part, was Vincent Price in movies, but Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing were so good at being different characters that I think it's much easier to put them in a place than it is to find a place to put Vincent Price.
I can see where you're going with that. But I've seen Vincent Price's early films, you know, from the 50s and 60s, and he was much more of a chameleon than like you said. As you were saying, it's unfortunate that people remember great actors like that based on their most recent, not always the most subsequential roles. So, yeah, people remember Vincent Price being the comedic Vincent Price, his voice, him playing Vincent Price in most of his roles.
Well, you know, he was in the Thriller video. I'm just
and that's what most people remember. But I think that if he were to tap his old styles that he used to do, I personally think that he would have made a great, like, old Jedi sage, you know, kind of like a contemporary of Yoda or something like that.
Okay.
That's just something I thought I'd bring up since we were talking about Christopher Lee.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, again, that's an uber nerdsy question that we would discuss ad nauseum on the Facebook group. So I liked it. It's an interesting rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And since you had mentioned Through the Looking Glass earlier, what the hey?
What the hey? Yes, and Christopher Lee was in the Tim Burton, Johnny Depp, Alice in Wonderland as the voice of the Jabberwocky, so it's all connected again, like we said. It's one big tangled web of movies. Yeah, I got nothing else, man. I'm pretty much talked about this.
Yeah, Tim Burton and Johnny Depp do a lot of work together. If Johnny Depp's in a movie that was reasonably decent, it was probably with Johnny Depp or with Tim Burton, rather.
Again, if we're playing, degrees of separation, did you notice that Johnny Depp was also a producer of this movie?
Strangely enough, I did, actually. I don't usually watch the credits. I'm just as interested in anyone else as finding out who the key grip and the head gaffer and the best boy are. But no, I don't usually watch the credits. I have a friend who will just happily sit through the credits until the very end. So I've never understood that. Perhaps he could explain it to me one day.
That's the thing. When I was a child and my brother would take me to movies, we'd stay and watch the credits. And this was long before the days of end credit scenes or mid credit scenes. We just sit and watch. I mean, it's end of Star Wars. We'd sit and watch the entire credits, and I think part of that for him was the music. But other than that, other movies that weren't Star Wars, we would sit and watch the credits. So I don't know if I can fully explain why, but it's something we did. But now, like I said, we live in an age now where there are mid and after credit scenes where we have to stay and watch because who knows what we're going to miss.
Yeah, and there's also the inclusion of some outtakes. That's been around for quite some time. I mean, they did it, I know, in the 70s where they would have bloopers from the movie in the end credits. So it kind of kept you in your seat so you could appreciate again who was the key grip. Like, oh, that was funny. Yeah. Oh, wait, I missed the key grip. Damn it. But yeah, I think there were a few more things in my notes, but for me, I think the biggest piece was what I'd said earlier about that line about when you're, missing a piece and you're broken, it's like you've lost your purpose. So that was my big takeaway from this movie. That's why Georges Méliès was lost, was because he was missing a piece. And that was, the ability to continue to create those movies. And that's why he didn't feel like he had a purpose. Hugo's purpose was to fix the machine, and then once that was fixed, he had another purpose. Every part of this movie had a reason for it being in the place that it was, when it was, and it was put together very well. If I had one complaint, there were questions that I was sort of writing down as the movie went along, and there was the moment where his father dies, his uncle takes him, and he's at the train station, and then suddenly the uncle's not there, and like, whoa, hey, what happened to the uncle? Where the hell did he go? Because it looked like he was going to be one of those torturous sort of moments in the movie, or sort of characters rather, that just, gave Hugo a hard time and a reason to want to escape from where he was.
Kind of the Harry Potter syndrome type of thing. He's meant for greater things, but he's going to live with these assholes. So
right, exactly. And then he just sort of showed up for his scene, disappeared, and then was a dead body later. So I think they could have put that in there just a little bit more as sort of a motivation to find a thing to get the message from his what he thought was the message from his father and feel fulfilled.
Yeah, but you know what I refer to that as, and I learned this from my 11th grade English literature teacher, and it's just a Shakespearean disappearance. Because he noted that in a lot of Shakespeare plays, sometimes characters just disappear. Like, he had no other purpose for them other than to deliver these lines for like one or two acts, and then they just were gone. No explanation, they just were gone.
But that's real life, though. I mean, it is. Now, I wouldn't expect an uncle who is taking custody of a child to, just disappear like that. But in real life, I mean, how many times do you interact with someone only to have them deliver their lines and then just leave? Like, oh, great, thanks.
In these movies, often.
Yes, yeah. So I think that was about my only complaint. I did do a little bit of research into the differences in the plot between the book and the movie, but I'm not sure that I want to go too far in depth into it because that's a long conversation, and in the interest of time, I'll just say that there were some very creative liberties taken with the movie as opposed to the book. And when I was researching it, and in fact, I just discovered this right before the podcast, I didn't realize this book was written in 2007 and that it wasn't that old. I assumed the book was written in the 30s or 40s or something. I don't know why. It's probably just some irrational thought that the movie is set in this time period, so it must have been that this book was written later. But I would actually like to try and locate the book and perhaps give it a read. It's reasonably well recommended.
Well, you got the title. I hate to say it, but you just plug it into Amazon and you find it.
Oh yeah. No, I in fact I had looked for it. You can also look for it on other book-selling websites. It's not just Amazon. There's more than Amazon. Competition. But and the title of the book is The Invention of Hugo Cabret. So it won a Caldecott Medal, apparently. I'm not sure what that is. Oh, Caldecott Medal is for picture books. It's an award for picture books, but it's not a picture book. So first novel to ever win that award. So
very good.
So did you have anything else you wanted to add or subtract or?
Yeah, I don't know if I just want to reiterate again. It'd be nice if movies that take place in France could actually have people that sound French and not English. I mean, geez, even the Pink Panther movies with Steve Martin, he was attempting a French accent as bad as it was. But again, that's...
I'm sorry, you have a message for me?
Again, that's just me armchair quarterbacking a movie, so...
Yeah, and I think you said it earlier. It's we'll call it a movie trope that anything set in Europe in a certain time period must have English people because that's how we lend authenticity to the era.
Yeah.
All right. Where would you put this on your shelf?
This one actually has the position of it's not top shelf. It's not general population. It's notable titles, mostly occupied by Blu-rays, unfortunately. Which, by the way, the edition, this is something we don't do very often on this podcast anymore, is I talk about the actual edition I bought. And I did. It's a special edition. It came with a 3D copy, and I know 3D kind of fell out of favor for Blu-rays and everything, but I still have it high definition, which I think I said this before. I mean, this movie is just beautiful. It seems like it was made for high definition. A lot of the scenes, especially the cityscapes and some of the other scenes about him making Méliès making his movies or anything. It just seems like it's perfect for it. And it is nice in 3D. If you like that kind of thing, you watching it on a 3D screen. If you happen to have that ability, it's really nice. So like I said, it's kind of that high middle class section of notable titles.
Okay.
So it's special, but not top shelf.
All right. Again, I don't own this movie, but if I did, it would be from a personal favorite movies kind of standpoint. I'm pulling this back from probably where it should be in a AFI top 100 sort of list kind of thing. But I'll put this, on the back end of the top shelf, leading edge of the second shelf. I enjoyed the movie. It was a great watch. There were parts that, got me emotional, and I hope that I kind of conveyed that earlier, the specific pieces of the movie that gave me pause and made me think, because I think it was an important message in the movie. It's, again, that love letter to film in general, but specifically one of the pioneers, and it really embraces in that childish innocence why we go to the movies, or at least what we hope to capture without knowing it sometimes, why we go to the picture shows and try and get into someone else's life for a couple of hours and have someone tell us a story. So for that reason, it's definitely top shelf, because it's not one of the movies that I personally love, which take a higher position. It's near the back. So there you go. Back into the top shelf, maybe edged out to very, very leading edge, cutting edge, bleeding edge, if you will, of the second shelf. So I can't put it any lower than that. It's Scorcese. He's a great filmmaker.
Like you said, it's a love letter, to movies, and like most love letters, you want to save it. You hold it in an exalted position.
Yep. So, and I have a couple of letters that my wife and I wrote very early on in our relationship still. So, love letters are important, and they do hold a certain esteem and a special place in your heart. So,
all right, enough said.
Okay. Yep. So, shall we find out what we're watching?
Let's go right ahead
for our next episode. Okay. I'm having a sound issue, so I'm just gonna have to tell you what it is. This new configuration is kind of hard to work with.
Okay.
So. Okay. All right. So. I'll do what I can now. All right, and pushing the magic random movie generator button.
The Cutting Edge.
The Cutting Edge.
Is that the ice skating one?
Yeah.
All right.
Yes.
I like that one. That was good.
Oh, which is funny because I just watched that on a movie channel the other day. I don't remember which one. I was just flipping through the channels, and there it was. I was like, oh. Yeah. All right,
yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that'll be fun. It's feeling fall-like in Los Angeles, and soon it will be winter, and it's about, I'm just trying to, sell it.
Yes.
Okay, cool. And with that, listeners, look, we talked for a good long time about this movie, but I know we left some things on the table, so if you want to give us some feedback, let us know what you thought about what we said, let us know what you think about this movie, or throw in some things that we might have missed. Let us know on our Facebook page, on our Twitter account. You can email us at wrios2016mr@gmail.com. You can check us out as evidenced by our previous listener feedback on our Podbean page, which is ironically usually what we link to the Facebook page. So it's kind of a circular loop. If you're touching one, you're probably touching the other, but we're definitely available on that. You can leave us feedback on iTunes, Google Play, podcasts, anywhere you listen to podcasts. Sorry, I was trying to sound like I was French. No, that's not it. But we would absolutely love to hear your feedback. Again, we are always soliciting for inputs for our 5 and 0 listener requested movies, and again, we just had one added, so keep them coming, and we appreciate your listening. And Dan, your movie themed goodbye is?
I know I've said it already, but I'm going to say it again because it's such a great line. If you've ever wondered where your dreams come from, look around. This is where they're made.
And with that, we'll see you in 2 weeks for The Cutting Edge.